Hello. Trust and hope that you enjoyed our offering, our video, our film. We had a wonderful time in Normandy together and with all of the people that we met, and we hope that our presentation somehow captured the flavour and conveyed the flavour of that. It wasn't meant to be a highly informative historical narrative or anything of that. There are other people on YouTube that produce those kind of videos, a then and now style, a real kind of sort of in-depth study, analysis or whatever, behind the scenes kind of presentation. But ours was always meant to be a travelogue. It was never meant to be anything other than that, and it was meant to be a homage as well, because as you no doubt has picked up in that, in two ways it was homage, because we visited places that we knew about and had studied about and so on, especially Joe, my son, and it was something that ever since he's been a boy wanted to do, was go to Normandy. He'd gone on and gone on and gone on, and we've been to various other places, like for instance Bastogne for anniversary celebrations. We've been to Arnhem for the 50th and the 75th, and it's something always. World War II has been a tremendous fascination of his, and that's because his grandfather fought in World War II. He was in the 14th Army in Burma, and he met old veterans as a boy, and now sadly they're all gone. And I worked with a lot of veterans and was able to, second, third hand relate the stories that they related to me. In all respects, it was a trip of discovery, but it was also a trip to pay homage, and Joe prepared a lot of little crosses. We did German ones as well. As Joe said at one point when we were at the German monument, they were all young men. They may have been National Socialists, they may not have been National Socialists, but in essence they were young men like anybody else's son, brother, father, whatever. And we'd like to think as well that we gave equal homage, equal gravitas to everybody. We weren't in any way, we didn't sort of treat anybody as insignificant in terms of their contribution. It was a wonderful week. We had I'm reading from notes, or I've got a prompt here that I wrote, and I'd like to sort of get into it by saying that the whole week was filled with that wonderful word serendipity. Some people use it indiscriminately, but in this sense it was literally tripping over an object and stubbing your foot and cursing, and then when you go down to pick it up you find out it's a block of gold. And we certainly tripped over a lot of blocks of gold in our serendipitous journey. It all kicked off with the fact that we'd booked accommodation, and at the last minute the owner cancelled on us because they could get a better price from other people, and so they took it away from us. The excuse was that the house was under or going to be sold. We didn't believe that for one moment. Anyway, the point is, we then had to rapidly lastminute.com book accommodation, and we ended up booking a place in a village called Ranville, which is very famous because it's within a few minutes walk of Pegasus Bridge, which was at the set centre, as you saw, of D-Day itself for us, both with the midnight ceremony and with D-Day itself. The owners were brilliant. They went off to Paris for the week, or they were going off to Paris, and they greeted us in, and right from the off, Joe flagged up that, "Dad, that's the chateau." what, you mean General Gale's shadow? Yeah, General Gale, oh wow. And one thing led to another, and whilst we were filming that first incident where the dog kicked off at the start of the video, again, serendipity, the next thing that happened was the owners, a gentleman called Francois, came out and going to get in the car. Joe got engaged with him because he's just got a knack for engaging with people, and the next thing was we got invited in. Yeah, it's, you know, this is the Château de Ranville, and we went on the Monday, I think it was, by invitation. We went for coffee and they showed us the chateau and we talked about it, and there was a gentleman there, a friend, Gilles, who acted as, if you like, interpreter, because they, apart from saying oh yes or oh no, that was about the extent of Francois' English. Our French between the three of us was enough to get by with various people. One incident occurred later on in the week which I'll relate later. That then led on to various other things later on in the week. I'll explain briefly why we're doing this epilogue as well, the whole postscript, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. It wasn't planned. This postscript or epilogue wasn't planned. What happened was that we'd accumulated so much additional information during the course of making the film, and obviously then subsequently, you know, as a knock-on effect, that including the memoir of a gentleman called Norman Ward, who was a major. He wasn't a major at Normandy, but he was in the intelligence section, stationed in the chateau, or in the grounds of the chateau in a barn. And so we felt the only way we can present all this info is me sitting down doing a presentation like this. I think, I hope and I trust that it's going to be worth your while to stick with it, because we've got the plans that Norman Ward, or Soldier Norman Ward, would have helped to prepare the briefing, shall we say, the intelligence briefing for Major Howard, who obviously you saw all of that, and some of you will know, many of you may not know who Major Howard was, but that would have come out in the video. And the direct link, I mean, it's not an abstruse link, because Norman Ward worked in G Intelligence branch of the 6th Airborne Division for General Gale. So they were given the task in early 1944 of preparing the briefing for all of the officers in command of the assault squads or assault troops, i.e. the airborne, about what their targets were and what to expect and everything else. So that information was already to hand. Joe was going to present that into the museum, which he did. But what was incredible was that we bumped into Sue. The two linked together beautifully, and it wasn't planned. It was not planned. It was just something that came together. So much information came in that we weren't actually prepared for that at the time, and so we were filming, we were on the hoof and everything else. There was no sort of studio presentation. So in essence, whilst we were editing the film, I sat down with Simone, my daughter, who has I think beautifully edited and produced this video for us, and I'm immensely grateful to her. She's very skillful at what she does. It came clear that the only way we were going to be able to do this and to present this in a meaningful and, if you like, interesting manner was to do it as an adjunct, as a postscript, epilogue, whatever you want to call it. And so here we are. I apologise that I don't keep looking away from the camera or whatever. It's not a confidence thing, as you can probably imagine. But what it is, I do need a prompt. I don't have all of this information in my head. I'm not that smart. Without further delay, Norman Ward, he ended his army career as a major. He joined the 6th Airborne Division in 1941 as part of the intelligence section under Captain his immediate captain was Johnny Max. The staff eventually comprised Major Jerry Lacoste, Captain Johnny Max, of course, Captain Freddie Scholes, Corporal Norman Ward, Lance Corporal Sid Ellis, Private Pat Piper, Corporal Taffy Jones and Lance Corporal Jack Forrest. Now that staff included, a couple of those gentlemen were in fact draftsmen. And they, according to Norman Ward's memoir, they prepared the actual physical models. They never visited France and they weren't taken, as it were, in the invasion, on the assault. I'm not sure whether they went afterwards or whatever. They may have visited as tourists after the war. But they produced brilliant models. I think it was Taffy Jones and Jack Forrest. I'm not certain, but I think they were the two draftsmen. Norman Ward was, in effect, the senior NCO. So he was, you know, right-hand man to his captain, Captain Max. And he was the youngest, incidentally. And the outfit was known as G, in parenthesis, Intel Branch. And after several weeks of preparation, Norman Ward was, he found himself in a glider next to the deputy commander, Colonel Parker, who won a DSO at Breville. There's another link with Breville because that's where you'll have seen it in the video. Company Sergeant Major McGuinness won his military medal. The Colonel won a medal. Breville is a battle honour for the a famous battle honour for the I think the Parachute Regiment, the Airborne, whatever it is. It's a famous battle honour. And anyway, he was on board the aircraft. He said goodbye to Johnny Max because they split everybody up to minimise casualties. People had gone on different gliders because it's a bit like the royal family. You don't want the whole headquarters staff goes bosh and the bosh go bosh, and they end up with no intelligence staff. So, you know, one intelligence man is better than no intelligence men. And the glider came down on its LZB shortly after 0300. Roughly 3 hours after the two bridges had been captured, so the British were in possession of their objectives in the vicinity of Ranville, and it took only minutes to reach the designated headquarters, the Château de Ranville. And as I mentioned, for obvious reasons, that the members of the staff teams were split up and they boarded different aircraft gliders, and it was planned that once all were landed, all would link up at the intended rendezvous points. Well, unfortunately, Johnny Max, Sid Ellis and Pat Piper were still missing by mid-morning the next day. So they landed at 0300, well, midday, you know, 9 hours later, Johnny Max and co are still missing on the 6th of June. And apparently Freddie Scholes and Jerry Lacoste turned up. Lacoste had a badly broken shoulder and he was evacuated with a staff sergeant who had a badly broken leg. According to Norman Ward, they were sent off, and they never returned, according to his memoir. They never returned. Now, he doesn't say that they were killed or whatever, but we must assume that Lacoste and the staff sergeant were just evac'd and the war was over before they recovered from it. I don't know. Apparently the 6th Airborne endured major German counterattacks against the perimeter, entirely as expected and clearly outlined in Major Howard's briefing, and it was very well prepared. These German counterattacks, remember the Germans are essentially the senior German officers are the junior German officers who fought in World War I. So all of the assault tactics, counterattack, Eingriff, which is what the Germans called it in World War I, the ability to they had whole divisions that were trained in Eingriff, and the British in World War I always expected immediate counterattack from the Germans. It was a spontaneous thing. They were able to put together ad hoc counterattacking groups. Sometimes later they developed full-on counterattacking forces. But the whole point is, it was that carried forward into World War II. And the British are always aware of it, and so that. You'll see in the thing on Major Howard, we've got copies of the documents for that we can show. The British were very well prepared because they knew, unlike in World War I, the big experience was that they knew what the Germans, it was predictable that they were going to do it. Nonetheless, they had to be well prepared, and they were, and the British repulsed all attacks on the perimeter and held the perimeter, but that wasn't easy. There were lots of casualties. At the chateau, a barn was allotted to Norman Wald as his billet and office, and apparently there were 4 enormous barrels of cider brewed in late 1943 for the harvest of 44 for the workers, and this was incredibly welcome, and apparently it made them really, really popular. There were lots of visitors with the cider. Max, Ellis and Piper were listed as missing, and ultimately they were declared as killed. It was a devastating loss for Norman Wald of 3 friends, and particularly the much loved Johnny Max. He was very devoted to him and thought very highly of him, and in fact all 3 of those lads are buried in Ranville Cemetery. Sadly, Freddie Skulls, who landed unscathed, was killed 10 days after D-Day on the 16th of June, and he's also buried in Ranville Cemetery along with a Captain Johnny McBride, who was one of Norman Wald's comrades. All this time, Norman Wald, under constant attack and artillery fire, was forced to continue his intelligence work, so there was no time to ponder over so many lost comrades. And all of this info, as I've noted here, came to light as a result of the serendipity of us bumping into, one morning we had an inconvenience, the internet went down and we had to wait in for the repairman to come from wherever he came from, Caen or somewhere like that. And while we were waiting, we bumped into our next door neighbours. We saw him go past, and Joe went and said bonjour. Turns out he's an Englishman from Shropshire. He used to be the former mayor of Shrewsbury. And they were a British couple, Sue and her partner. And they were visiting, they happened to be visiting for the 80th anniversary because, like us, and Sue, Norman Wald's daughter, had determinedly continued to visit Normandy, and particularly Ranville, each anniversary following the death of her father as a kind of homage to him, and she was desperately seeking to find where her dad was billeted and spent the early days of the war in Ranville, or his war. And fortunately for Sue and for us, Joe was able, with the contact already established and with our cordial relationship with the current owners of Château de Ranville, to arrange a very special and private visit for Sue and her partner to the exact barn and cider barrels where her daddy had lived his D-Day experience. You will have seen it, it's a ridiculous bit of film, but it was the only bit that I could get because it was a private moment, and you couldn't start sort of one, mob-handed, getting up a 52-seater and we'll all go and look in the barn. She was very tearful because she'd finally found that it was a bit like searching for the Holy Grail. They'd been searching all around the village and no one knew, and they had no idea because of no sort of military background, if you like, as such. And the little bit of film that we had, of course, is that bit where I comment about the sets of legs of the people going into the barn and Joe's on the left. And it was a very, Joe didn't go in, but it was a very, she shed tears and Joe gave her a hug and all the rest of it. We'd spent an evening with Sue and her partner, having some wine together and chatting about things, and Sue very kindly offered up the information, the memoir, and just verbal information about her dad. It was a huge stroke of luck for us, really. It really, really was, because it kind of neatly dovetailed in with the fact that this particular man was involved in the preparation of the briefing for Major Howard. That's how this short section comes together. There was a short memoir from that Norman Wald wrote for the 50th anniversary. It was a kind of an appendix to his original memoir. And it was from 1994, it was the 50th anniversary, and that was hugely illuminating, and it helped to fill some gaps in our knowledge as well. It seems that Johnny Max and Pat Piper were both killed when their glider crashed on D-Day, whilst Sid Ellis was injured in a separate glider crash. He was taken prisoner, and post-war he returned to Wales, where he eventually died of old age. It further seems that ill luck dogged Norman Ward's old outfit, that's G intelligence section, right up to the cessation of hostilities. They were continually suffering casualties. So it wasn't, it wasn't like staff stuck behind them. They were right in the thick of it. There's even mention in his memoirs of a massacre that took place in some woods, and it has been marked up as a British war memorial. And Norman, on the 50th, he spoke to a middle-aged man whose father witnessed all this. Not first-hand, but the aftermath of the dead bodies and so on. Norman Ward was promoted to Major late in the war, and he ended his military career in 1978. I'm not sure when Norman Ward died, but I think it's within the last few years. And until his death, he continued to revisit Normandy, and with an ever-dwindling band of former comrades. I mean, in 1994, he recounts that Major Howard was there with his former glider pilot, acting as his steersman on the wheelchair, but was in a wheelchair, sadly. As a final, very interesting postscript, it was fascinating to learn from Norman Ward's memoir that the Château de Ranville was owned during the war and for centuries by the de Noble family, whose ancestors had participated under Duke William at the Battle of Hastings. We just think that's a really interesting connection. We asked the current owner, Francois, who owned it, and we couldn't really get any joy there. At least 30 years ago, the owner, Jocelyn de Noble, and his wife Margaret were still entertaining Norman at the chateau. We were extremely privileged to gain exclusive access, and very, I would think, unique to the chateau by the current owners, on 3 separate occasions over a week's stay in Ranville. And we remain extremely grateful to Francois and his wife, and to Gilles and his wife. So now we move on to Major Howard's plans. Our travelogue as film has covered Major Howard's D-Day role. However, as I said in my introduction, for technical reasons, it wasn't possible to include the important and vital document that Joe was able to proudly present to the Pegasus Museum. Here they are. We can show you now. What we have, looking at the sheet 1, is, or copy number 1, it's dated 2nd of May 1944, and it is the briefing for the 5th Parachute Brigade. And what it actually says is, it gives a really clear analysis of what the German defences that they know and for Howard to expect. They inform him that the garrison is of the 2 bridges, that's to say what we know as Horsa and Pegasus, consists of about 50 men armed with 4 light anti-aircraft guns, probably their 20mm, 4 to 6 light machine guns, 1 anti-aircraft machine gun, and possibly 2 anti-tank guns of less than 50cm calibre. There is a concrete shelter under construction, and the bridge will have been prepared for demolition. On the subject of a mobile reserve under Part B, it says there's 1 battalion of the 736 Grenadier Regiment, and they are in the area Lebisay and Biéville, with probably 8 to 12 tanks under command. This battalion is either wholly or partially carried in motor transport, and will have at least 1 company standing by as an anti-air troop picket. The battalion headquarters of the Right Coastal Battalion of the 736 Grenadiers is in a given area, gives a map reference, and at least 1 platoon will be available in this area as a fighting patrol ready to move out at once to seek information. And so it goes on. So state of alertness, the large scale preparedness necessary for the invasion of the continent. This is from the British perspective. The suitability of the moon and tide will combine to produce a high state of alertness in the German defence. The bridge garrison may be standing to, and charges will have been laid in the demolition chambers. Detailed information on enemy defences and reserves is available on demand from divisional intelligence summaries. That would be Norman Ward's section. I'm saying Norman Ward's section because he's the closest link that we have in terms of written information and so on. It's not actually his section as I've outlined. It's in fact commanded by Lacoste. Own troops, it says there's the 5th Parachute Brigade. It drops immediately northeast of Ranville at H-4 hours 30 minutes and moves forthwith to take up a defensive position around the 2 bridges. So the support troops for Howard and his comrades are the 5th Parachute Brigade. 3rd Parachute Brigade drops at H-4:30 and is denying to the enemy the high wooded ground south of Le Mesnil, and gives a map reference. And then finally, under C, we've got the 6th Air Landing Brigade is landed northeast of Ranville and west of Bruneval at about H+12 hours, so that's actually late morning, midday, and it moves thence to a defensive position in the area Saint-Honorine, La Chaudière and Escoville. The 3rd BR Division is landing west of Ouistreham at H hour, with the objective being Caen. So they actually landed at the mouth of the river. So you can see from that it goes on, composition of forces, the command of Howard, 2nd Oxford and Bucks. Troops are D Company, 2nd Oxford and Bucks, less the supporting Brennes and 3-inch mortar detachment. 2 platoons of B Company, 2nd Oxford and Bucks, detachment of 20 sappers, pioneers, 249th Field Company Airborne, and detachment of the 1st Wing Glider Pilot Regiment. It's got there, of course, triangulation of the flight plan for them. It's the general outline. The capture of the bridges will be a coup de main, depending largely on surprise, speed and dash for success. Provided the bulk of your force lands safely, you should have little difficulty in overcoming the known opposition on the bridges. Your difficulties will arise in holding off an enemy counter-attack on the bridges until you are relieved. I think if any of you, lots of you will have done, seen the film The Longest Day. Echoed in the background is hold until relieved, hold until relieved, and of course that echoes back right at the point when the reinforcements do arrive, accompanied by bagpipes, and in fact that, as far as I know, was a real situation. And of course the actor playing the part of Major Howard had actually fought at the bridges, and he played the part of his CO on the day, which is quite a nice touch. And he, in his mind, he's singing "Hold Until Relieved." So that was the orders. So that's here in black and white. It wasn't just something that was inserted or was an abstract in the film. It actually was his orders: hold until relieved. Possible enemy counter-attacks, and this is what I referred to. You must expect a counter-attack any time after H-4. So that's 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, they're dropping around about midnight. That's quite a long time for the Germans to stage a counter-attack, but nevertheless H-4. Any time after that, could be before that, but they're stating clearly H hour is, I think it's 7 o'clock, whatever, so that would be middle of the night. This attack may take the form of a battle group consisting of 1 company of infantry, lorries and up to 8 tanks, and 1 or 2 guns mounted on lorries. Or it may be a lorried infantry company alone or infantry on foot. The most likely line of approach for this force is down one of the roads leading from the west or southwest, but a cross-country route cannot be ignored. Organising a defensive position, it is vital that the crossing places be held, and to do this you will secure a close bridgehead on the west bank, in addition to guarding the bridges. The immediate defence of the bridges and of the west bank of the canal must be held at all costs. Patrolling, you will harass and delay the deployment of the enemy counter-attack forces of the 736 Grenadiers by offensive patrols covering all the road approaches from the west. Patrols will remain mobile and offensive. Up to 1/3 of your effective force may be used in this role. The remaining 2/3 will be used for strategic defence and immediate counter-attack. The employment of the Royal Engineers. You will give your sappers the following tasks only in order of priority: neutralising the demolition mechanisms, removing charges from demolition chambers, and establishing personnel ferries. That's across obviously both of the waterways, the river and the canal, because as I said in the video, on a couple of occasions, they are huge barriers. They may not be very wide, but if it's above head height, soldiers have got a major problem in crossing a waterway. So there has to be a way across, and ferries in this case are the elected method that's been chosen. In your detailed planning of the operation, you will consult with the Commander of the Royal Engineers or Royal Engineer Commander nominated by him in carrying out these tasks by the Royal Engineers personnel under your command. So that's the orders that and briefing and orders that Major Howard received. He then had to prepare his defence and also instructions for his troops in advance, and based on that, which turned out to be superbly accurate intelligence analysis of the situation on the ground, it would have been based on lots of reconnaissance by aircraft, it would have been based on intelligence gathered by local partisans and so on and so forth, spies, and all of it would have come together at G Intel branch to put together a comprehensive set of information for Major Howard. Now the notes that he writes, here they are on the screen. You've seen page 1 and 2 of the instructions he was given. Page 1 of his written instructions. Let's start with the map. We'll bring up the map, and the map shows the canal and the river. You can see on that, I hope you can see it relatively clearly, there's a lot of handwritten notes under that. They would be in pencil, incidentally. He's used crayon coloured pencils for his map. The road is shown in orange and the river and the canal are naturally shown in blue. You can see the standard indicator for bridges, and he's numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. 5 and 6 are in the middle of the screen along with 3. 3 is nearest to the canal bridge, and 5 and 6 are between 3 and the river bridge. Now I'm going to read from the notes because they're difficult to read because, you know, everybody's handwriting is different, and this is 80 years old, but more importantly it's in his Major Howard's handwriting, and it isn't the best. It's not highly legible. It says under number 1 something along the lines of road extending west northeast. Patrol the canal 500 degrees, not 500 degrees, but there's 500 in there. North, patrol to the port if not operating. On the road, blocking the road obviously. West southeast patrol, and the canal 500 metres. Got it. So the group the troops at 1 are to patrol 500 metres north, patrol to the port if it's not operating. I'm not quite sure exactly what that means, but then he instructs the group at 2 to operate and patrol 500 metres south. Fascinating that in 80 years ago metres were used. You'd have thought that they were used in imperial yards and so on, but anyway, he goes for metres. He says at 3, I'm not sure what the first word is, but he mentions the road area northwest, northeast and southwest, southeast. Patrol between the bridges and south between the canal and the river. So clearly he's expecting to find Germans south of the bridges on the, if you like, the island between the two, the land between the two bridges. On 5 he says, fighting patrol, this is backing up number 6, and it says fighting patrol should, goodness, I can't read what it says on, it looks like Farted Road, but clearly that is not what he's written. Recce patrols out to meet enemy from the south and southwest. Number 6, fighting patrols south of the port. Recce established out to west, away from north, and again, difficult to read. Sappers, number 7, it's not marked on the map as such, but sappers, if available, will take over 3 area and tasks, leaving that platoon as a reserve for the interval. It says, as a sort of a subscript, Royal Engineers task us to neutralise a demolition. So all of this is actually, it's on if you look down the bottom, he'd written all this on his coloured map and scrubbed it out and decided to then write it on a separate sheet that he hoped would be have greater clarity, but it's no clearer on this sheet. I'm glad I didn't have to read these orders by torchlight or whatever. I'd have got a right rollicking by saying, sir, I can't read your handwriting. Harass the enemy and delay the deployment of the 736 Grenadiers by offensive patrols on the approaches from the west. And then he gives the detail of it's almost verbatim what he was asked or given as priority tasks for the Royal Engineers that were under his command. That was neutralise the demolition charges, remove the charges from the demolition chambers, and establish personnel ferries. If I'd have had to read that on the I can read it in the typewritten format that came from the intelligence section. So that's it. So very, very interesting stuff, because that defence worked extremely successfully. He did hold until relieved by, oh goodness me, I can't remember the blooming name of the bloke. It was, love it, with the piper playing, famous incident in the film, but it's Lord Lover. And he achieved his goal. And by extremely accurate intelligence, superb planning based upon that intelligence, and don't forget that the intelligence section prepared, the draftsman prepared the models, which can be seen to this day, I think already mentioned, in the Airborne Museum. The 2 men that prepared that, I believe that was Taffy and Jack Forrest. They were the 2 draftsmen who were attached to the intelligence section. They never went to France, but they produced brilliant models. So all of it was brilliant work by the British, and knowing how the Germans worked was good as well. Know your enemy. And the execution of that was faultless. And the other thing that was extremely important was the skill, courage and competence of the glider pilots, and the glider pilot particularly, who acted as the steersman on Howard's wheelchair in 1994. He brought the glider with Howard and his men right up to the bridge, literally almost touching the bridge, and they were stunned, took a few moments and piled out onto the bridge and took it straight away. It was all over in a very short space of time, and they suffered, I believe, 2 casualties. The first casualty in Normandy was in actual combat with the enemy, was a soldier that was killed and buried in Ranville Cemetery, and I believe from a further investigation there was an officer who got killed. So with 2 casualties they captured probably the most important points that you can imagine for the British, because I can't stress enough that had the Germans been able to retain those bridges and get reinforcements over from those bridges, life on the beaches would have been incredibly difficult for the British. So that's that section. We're moving on now to obviously relative but slightly different, and we'll do that in a moment. So, continuing. You will remember in the video there was reference to a gentleman called Ernie Sabaton. Ernie was a man I worked with in a timber yard over half a century ago. I confirmed that he was in the Ulster Rifles. The role of the Ulster Rifles is well documented, and this is very important because there's a bit of an anomaly, shall we say, because half a century ago Ernie was in, say, 1974, was as near to Normandy in terms of time span as we are from the mid-90s now. And so anybody of a certain age, you know, anybody that's in their, say, 40s, will be able to remember stuff from the Euros and all the, football and what have you from the mid-90s, the Spice Girls and all of that. So the point that I'm making is he was lucid, he was clear, he was a man at the time, and he probably in his 50s. So I would say he was completely compos mentis. It was recent enough in his mind and vivid enough in his mind that he would have, what he was relating was dead accurate. And the point is, the anomaly is about the folding bicycles, because I didn't really delve too much into the story of this, but I always accepted that it seemed very plausible, and Ernie was absolutely adamant about the folding bikes, and as you remember in the video, he said that they threw the bikes in the sea. They were landed at the wrong point, came ashore at the wrong point, and the folding bikes would have been airborne bikes. They would have been the same bikes that were issued to them that had been issued to the airborne. And in fact, I know that we've looked into it, the Canadians had folding bikes, and there was a detachment, I believe, from the Ulster unit with the Canadians. So that could be Ernie's role, it could be that. The concept was exactly as I explained before, that they were going to do what the Japanese had done at Singapore, which was get on the bikes, literally, and go in behind enemy lines, seize bridges, crossings, whatever, crossroads and so on and so forth, generally disrupt the Germans and act as in the old days dragoons or mounted infantry had done. Cavalry in the First World War had ridden behind enemy lines, dismounted, fought as infantry, and waited for the reserves to come up. That kind of stuff was superseded by the airborne, because they were doing the light roll, dropping in and waiting for reserves to come up, or supporting troops to come up. So we'll take the bicycles as a definite. Also, Ernie's Normandy experience ended at Caen, in the assault on Caen, because, as I related, he and his squad, or his comrades in his squad, there was a young officer with them who abandoned them, not cowardly, but I think he'd lost his mind or whatever, because Ernie related that they were under massive fire, counter fire from the Germans in Caen. There was an M3 half-track that had pulled up on the road in front of them, and young, inexperienced soldiers' illusion, it was giving them cover, they thought. So suddenly the young officer got up with his walking stick and his, whether it was a Webley or a 1911 Colt, don't know, pulled his pistol, or had his pistol out, and said, "Right chaps, I'm off, I'm going to Caen. If anybody wants to come with me, we'll do, otherwise you read about me in the newspapers." And with that he got up out of the culvert, the ditch, whatever, and left his charges there. Off he went into the smoke, because everything was just smoke, explosions and what have you. There was a moment when the frightened young soldiers all looked at one another. Ernie said this, and suddenly, just as a sort of an instinctive herd thing, the group of them scampered and dived under the half-track. Only just got under there, and the thing was hit. It had a direct hit. It was blown to pieces, and the ammunition and more importantly, the fuel went. And everybody got killed except Ernie, who was extremely badly burned, 80% burns or something like that. He then spent the rest of the war in Europe recuperating. I think he had some rudimentary plastic surgery and what have you. He was always heavily, shall we say, scarred. His skin was delicate, and he was always vulnerable with the sun and what have you. But he survived and he lived a full life. He died in older age, was sadly missed because he was an incredible character. And as I said in the bit on the cemetery, he ended up at the base of the Istrian Peninsula, which is now in Slovenia, guarding the port of the naval base of Pola, depending which language you want, wearing a soft hat, a beret, armed with a pistol. Could have been a Webley, could have been a 1911 pistol, and a walking stick. And it was successful, and the war came to a close, and that was Ernie's war. Ernie was then demobbed and came home to the UK. Now, if anyone that wishes that is not satisfied with what the story that I've related about the bicycles, because I think that's very important, anyone that wishes to contact us if they have any important info on this particular matter or can throw any light on this subject, please let us know, and it would be most welcome. Next person I want to talk about is a man called David Jock Stewart. He was another man that I had the honour to know and to work alongside over 50 years ago. Incidentally, the whole crew in the timber yard that I worked in East London were all World War II veterans. Joe Collins, the crane driver, John Taylor, one of the slingers, his brother-in-law Albert, and George Mann. But that wasn't uncommon. World War II was closer in time then, in the mid-70s, than the Falklands is to us now. Anyway, so that's why I emphasise that point, because if you were talking to someone now who'd been involved in something of world importance from only 30 years ago, you'd accept that their memory was good, particularly if they were competent enough to hold down a proper job. So Jock joined the Paras from the off. So I think he joined the army in 1939 as a volunteer and found out there was a new force that was being put together, and he volunteered, and that was it. He served, I think, overall 9 years. I'll explain in a moment why he served and fought for 9 years. He took part in the raid at Bruneval, and as a homage to him and his comrades, we felt it appropriate to visit the site and the monument, which was very conveniently on our way home. Although Bruneval was earlier in the war, it was against a Würzburg radar device. The raid was incredibly successful. I think there was 120 men that took part in this. Jock was one of them. His real name was David Stewart, but for obvious reasons he was called Jock. So as I said, it was very convenient for us to visit this. There's some still shots here on the screen now, and it was a fitting end to our pilgrimage to Normandy, pilgrimage in every sense of the word. And there we found the Roll of Honour, and as you can see, Corporal David Stewart's name is proudly emblazoned there. For me personally, it was a moving and proud moment to, if you like, metaphorically hold hands once again with this lovely man. So it was great for me to do that. It's something that I'd had in mind for many years, and never, one of those things you think, oh, I'll do that. Again, like them all, Jock's dead. He died, very sadly, he died of esophageal cancer back in, oh God, I think he died about 30 years ago, Jock. Very sad. Jock wasn't at Normandy because he was in the 1st Airborne, so he was fighting in Italy. He was very badly wounded in the fighting there. He was actually hit in the leg by an MG42. He nearly lost his leg, and he spent the rest of the war recovering from that wound. I actually saw the wound once, and it was a huge, deep wound in the back of his leg. And as a consequence of this, he missed Arnhem. He missed the Arnhem Operation Market Garden, and where many of his old comrades were killed, so it was very sad for him. But he volunteered at the end of the war. He recovered, and he continued service, and he did his final drops during the Greek Civil War. That was a very hair-raising experience, and equally as dangerous as fighting Germans and their allies. Jock completed many combat drops. Don't know how many, but many. You know, we're probably talking in the scores, and hence he saw lots of action. I'll leave your imagination to decide on how that went. So, Jock, it was a real honour to have known you, and I'm delighted to have visited the place where you did your first combat drop at Bruneval. Thank you, Jock. Just a little postscript on the story regarding Sergeant Major McGuinness. You will have seen, of course, in the video the citation and the story relating to Sergeant Major McGuinness. It would have been really good in all of the excitement and kerfuffle and everything else. We lost the contact with Sergeant Major McGuinness's grandson and his great-grandson. Hopefully, in some convoluted way, they will get to see this video. There are some photos here which we got of the grandson and his son, the great-grandson of CSM McGuinness, and also of a couple of extra bits and pieces to do around that little presentation. So it's really just a footnote to say, again, it was serendipity, because if we hadn't had the stuff to take to Joe hadn't had the material to take to the museum, we wouldn't have been on that exact day and moment when I assume Mr. McGuinness, as he was Sergeant Major McGuinness's grandson, Mr. McGuinness and his son, we don't know their names, we haven't got a clue what Mr. McGuinness's first name is and what his son's called. As I say, it's our sincere hope that someone somewhere will point out this video to them. We did say we were going to put it out there, and they'll get in touch. So, as and when, good luck to everybody there. So moving on, final bit of serendipity in all this is only a short point, and that is my car has got a personalised number plate. I won't go into the details of what it is. It's to do with a certain London football club. WHU are the three letters, the suffix letters. You'll have seen in the video there was a point at which we were on one of the drop zones, on the DZs, LZs landing zoners combined, and it was, I think, it was about the middle of the week, and very oddly we weren't familiar with the area at all, and it was a sort of a dirt road. It was a cut through road, and we jumped back in the car on the point that's indicated in the film. And suddenly coming towards us is a car with a bloke flashing his lights and gesticulating, pulled up alongside us. Ken, my brother, has half decent French. I've taught myself French over the years, enough to go shopping and so on, as the usual touristy thing. And between the three of us, we got from him that as we actually thought that this bloke was going to tell us off or have a go. We were on the wrong side of the road. We weren't. We were on the wrong side of the road, or we shouldn't be going in that direction. It was. We didn't. None of that. It wasn't that at all. This bloke was ecstatic, and the reason for it was because the personalised number plate corresponded with the matriculation number of his late lamented friend. What had happened was his friend, I assume he contracted cancer, or was going to die of cancer, and on his deathbed he'd said to this chap driving this car, "Don't worry, I'll be alright, I'll send you a message." He didn't say what the message was, and so when he's bumping along this country road coming towards us, he sees the number plate, and the number plate, apparently, according to this man, he seemed compos mentis, he didn't seem drunk or that he'd been smoking marijuana. It was his friend's matriculation number, and he'd said, well, that was the message. Now, mate, what you will have that, the three of us saw it. We've had no photographs or any other evidence to prove that this was the case. There's nothing magical about it. It was just an interest in. We were gobsmacked, because we thought what a strange thing to happen. It was just very, very strange. But anyway, make of it what you will. There you are. And that, my friends, is the end of this postscript, this footnote, whatever. So do hope that you've really enjoyed it. Thanks to all of the people that have been involved in the making of it. My son Joe, David Blair, a colleague of his, ex-paratrooper, who provided the information for Major Howard's papers. The people at the Chateau, my daughter Simone for editing this, as I said earlier, most beautifully in my opinion. Ken, my brother, for taking some absolutely stonking good photographs, which we've been able to incorporate as a postscript to every single day. There's a little photo montage, so you get to see stuff that's behind the scenes, as it were, stuff that happened but we didn't have the presence of mind to either film, or it wasn't appropriate to film at the time. People didn't want to be photographed, you know, particularly some of the veteran photographs or whatever. And so that's it. But once again, I hope you enjoyed it, and it was our delight and pleasure and honour to have actually been there for the 80th anniversary of Operation Overlord. Thank you very much.